Gardens is clear, and the joy that she had in being able to go to the Chelsea Flower Show this year could be seen by all. And her love of horses, of course, which has also been referred to. I think that was clear at the Royal Windsor Horse Show in the last evening when she was able to attend that event. And there was a particularly poignant moment when Lady Louise Windsor entered the arena driving the carriage of the late Duke of Edinburgh. Her Majesty has been a constant presence in our lives. She is respected across the world. She has been steadfast in her selflessness, in her dedication to duty, in her commitment to her country. For 70 years, she has dedicated her life to service of her country and her people. And for that, from the bottom of our hearts, we say simply, ma'am, thank you, and God save the Queen.
Yeah, I commend the Honourable Lady on her Platinum Jubilee Purple. If we had thought it could have been made compulsory, perhaps on another day. Sir Ed Davey.
Mr. Speaker, on behalf of the Liberal Democrats, it's a pleasure to join every party in the House today to send our best wishes and support this address to the Queen. Madam and Mr. Deputy Speaker, 2 weeks ago, during the Queen's speech, we sent our well wishes for Her Majesty's health. So it's been wonderful to see the Queen out and about in the last 2 weeks at various celebration events, most recently opening her namesake, the Elizabeth Line, and attending the Royal Horticultural Society's Chelsea Flower Show. Mr. Deputy Speaker, in her coronation speech, Queen Elizabeth said this: "Throughout all my life and with all my heart, I shall strive to be worthy of your trust." I think the whole country will agree our Queen has more than fulfilled her promises made to our nation. Her service, her sense of selflessness, her steadfast commitment to the nation. These values and her service have defined Her Majesty's 7-decade reign and will continue to define her. And that unwavering nature of service and duty is made all the more remarkable by the length of Her Majesty's reign. Our Queen is the longest reigning female monarch in history, and not just of this country, but of anywhere in the world. And unlike any other monarch, of this country at least, her reign has seen more peace and more prosperity than at any time in our nation's history. The Queen's gentle but strong presence throughout these years has been ever constant, and in challenging times she is always a source of calm and comfort. Her Majesty movingly described the Duke of Edinburgh, whose presence will be greatly missed at these Jubilee celebrations, and she described him as her strength and stay. Well, truly, Mr. Deputy Speaker, Her Majesty is the strength and stay of our nation. And through it all, she has remained above the fray of politics, something which is so valuable and so important. Because we in this democratic place will inevitably have disagreements on many, many things. There are and should be many shades of opinion. But because of Her Majesty, being proud of our country, being patriotic, is not about your political allegiance. It's not grounded in whether you agree with the government of the day. So I'm grateful that the Queen clearly values her loyal opposition as much as her government. And it's because of the Queen we can come together here today, members across the House, political polar opposites, and together reflect on the many things that we have in common. That sense of pride in our nation is something that we can all celebrate and share in this Platinum Jubilee. And in 1977, in 2002 and in 2012, we've been fortunate enough to enjoy other Jubilees with street parties, commemorative mugs, and of course the unforgettable sight of Brian May playing guitar on the roof of Buckingham Palace. I was at school when we celebrated the Silver Jubilee, and to be honest, my strongest memory of 1977 is the Queen's smile and personal delight as Virginia Wade won Wimbledon. And my fingers are crossed, Mr. Deputy Speaker, that Emma Raducanu might serve up something similar later this year. Then for the Golden Jubilee in 2002, I was honoured to meet Her Majesty when she visited my constituency in the Royal Borough of Kingston. Back then, the Queen unveiled a stone commemorating the 1100th anniversary of the coronation of King Edward the Elder, crowned in Kingston, one of the great Anglo-Saxon kings. In 2025, Kingston will be celebrating the 1100th anniversary of the crowning of King Athelstan, the first true, undisputed King of England. Nothing would bring me greater pleasure than welcoming our country's greatest monarch back to Kingston to mark this special occasion. And as others said, the highlight of the Diamond Jubilee in 2012 was watching the film when the Queen parachuted down to the opening ceremony of the Summer Olympics. I've been honoured, Mr. Speaker, to have several conversations with the Queen over the years. I won't disclose those, but I will disclose a conversation I had with Queen Margaret of Denmark during the Summer Olympics, when I was able to visit her on the royal yacht, a rather small affair compared to the one the government currently wants to buy. And Queen Margaret, I asked her, when was she taking up parachuting? And she drew on a cigarette, because Queen Margaret of Denmark is a committed smoker, and she said, when I'm over 80. And I think she had some very kind words to say about Queen Elizabeth II. As for the Platinum Jubilee, I'm sure, like colleagues across the House, we've already been engaged in celebrations in our constituency. Last Monday, I channeled my inner Mary Berry to judge a Jubilee bake-off at Ellingham Primary School in Chessington. I was thrilled to crown Charlotte as the star baker for her delicious Union Jack cake, topped with raspberries and blueberries, and present prizes too for year group winners Nancy and Aidan for their Jubilee tributes. But amongst the mountain of the children's sponge cakes and cupcakes, I was struck by two things in particular. First, a huge temptation to cheat on my diet, but I didn't, Mr. Deputy Speaker. But second, was the palpable excitement and enthusiasm the young children had for the Queen and the Jubilee. Indeed, one of the particular joys of Royal Jubilees is seeing how it brings people together and the excitement of young people, especially in our communities with those wonderful street parties. I'm hoping to go to a few, in fact many, in my constituency. So, Mr. Deputy Speaker, I would like to join all sides of the House in wishing Her Majesty the very best on this momentous occasion.
Sir Edward Lee.
Most of the people who've spoken in this debate have lived under no other monarch apart from Queen Elizabeth, apart from the father of the house. I must confess that as I was only one when the present Queen came to the throne, my recollection of the last reign is somewhat dim, but I've been very happy. I've been very happy to live during this one. The Queen is the only leading public figure, and I'm not sure this has been mentioned so far, who never asked for a job, never campaigned for it, never plotted for it, and probably never wanted it. So our whole life has been one of duty. What an incredible record. Yeah. And there's another point I want to make which hasn't been emphasised so far. Her Majesty is one of the very few leading public figures left to acknowledge her faith. Others, perhaps, fear putting themselves on some kind of moral pedestal. Her faith is moderate, compassionate, non-judgmental. And of course, she reminds of it every year on the Feast of the Incarnation when she talks to us in her Christmas address. And of course, at the end of the Queen's speech, she tells us, as we stand at the bar of the house over there, I pray that the blessings of Almighty God may rest on your counsels. Well, Mr. Deputy Speaker, I doubt if they always do. But Princess Elizabeth has never been, and Queen Elizabeth has never been afraid of talking about her faith. Who can forget her 21st birthday speech in Cape Town to the Commonwealth, where she talked of wherever they live, whatever race they come from, whatever language they speak, and her vow that her whole life, whether it be long or short, shall be devoted to serving her peoples. And she ended that address by invoking divine help when she said, "God help me to make good my vow, and God bless all of you who are willing to share in it." The reign of the first Queen Elizabeth was marked by religious bigotry, division, and bloodshed. Indeed, one of my own ancestors was hung, drawn, and quartered for his faith. But the reign of this Queen Elizabeth has been marked by unity, peace, freedom, and toleration. And that is why, whether you're people of faith or whether you're atheists or humanists or secularists, you appreciate her long record of devoted. One final personal point. I know you're not supposed to talk about Privy Council meetings, but the Prime Minister's emboldened me by addressing in part what happens in his meetings with the Sovereign. When I was made a Privy Councillor, of course, I mentioned to the present clerk that I was very proud of the fact that my father had been clerk of the Privy Council some 35 years ago. Of course, he's a very modern civil servant. He looked completely blank. When I summoned up courage to mention it to Her Majesty, she immediately gave me an eagle eye and said, "Yes, I know it, I remember it, I know it." And that sort of sums up not just her devotion to duty, but the fact is she has a formidable intellect. And how lucky we are to have as a head of state somebody who has such an incredibly long institutional memory. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Chris Elmore.
Thank you very much, Mr Deputy Speaker. It is an honour and a privilege to speak in this humble address to Her Majesty the Queen. We come here today to celebrate her service to our nation and to reflect upon her momentous 70 years as our sovereign. Her Majesty is now the third longest serving monarch in world history. When we look over her reign, we see a world transformed. When the Queen first took to the throne, the very idea of having the power of a computer in your palm was pure science fiction. The idea of putting a human on the moon was still a dream, and the Cold War was only just getting started. Closer to home, the NHS was still in its infancy, giving people back control over their health, and the welfare system was only just starting to truly level up the country. These achievements laid the foundations of a nation Her Majesty was about to be coronated to rule over to this day. Our armed forces, who so loyally defend and protect Her Majesty and our country, have faced many deployments during her reign. The government should be using this auspicious year as a chance to renew our covenant with them. Her Majesty has proudly led our armed service personnel, and it's only right that we reflect her pride in them in this Parliament. The United Kingdom has witnessed fundamental changes in how society welcomes others and expresses our gratitude for their contribution under her reign. Her Majesty showed us the way in being a more compassionate society by advocating the importance of the Commonwealth. She has acted as a driving force to bring people together from across the world to celebrate our differences and share in our joint aspirations for a more peaceful, prosperous world. Without a shadow of a doubt, Mr Deputy Speaker, the Commonwealth is one of Her Majesty's greatest achievements. The Queen is passionate about her horse racing, as many members have said today, and it would be remiss of me not to mention something that brings Her Majesty so much joy in a humble address that celebrates her life and achievements. She has had some truly fantastic horses, including one of the most famous, Estimate. Many a race-going fan will remember the poignant moment when, in 2012, Estimate won the Queen's Vase at Royal Ascot, which was presented to her by the late Duke of Edinburgh, someone whose service to our country we also greatly value and miss. For ministers on the Treasury bench who like a flutter, I've spotted a few runners that may be of interest today. You've got Oh So Audacious in 2 p.m. at Yarmouth, followed by Enough Already in the 3:30. But there again, Mr Deputy Speaker, they may prefer Danger Alert in the 2:10 at Haydock. Now, if Her Majesty is looking for something to really put the cherry on the Jubilee cake, I've got just the thing, Mr Deputy Speaker. Maesteg Town Hall, in my beloved Ogmore constituency, is looking forward to its long-awaited grand reopening, and I cannot think of anything better than welcoming Her Majesty to do the grand unveiling. So if anyone in the palace is listening, Mr Deputy Speaker, she's very welcome indeed. Speeches we have here today have rightly focused on Her Majesty's dedication and commitment to uphold our institutions and laws. The Queen's integrity and quiet perseverance in the face of difficulty should act as an example to us all. When she was needed, she delivered. It's vital that every single person in this chamber lives up to the oath we make when entering this house and carry out our duty with the same honour and integrity that she has displayed for more than 70 years. The Platinum Jubilee has the power to bring communities together. I know this is the case in my Ogmore constituency, and I look forward to the events planned in the towns and villages that make up my community. We have all faced an incredibly tough 2 years, and these Jubilee celebrations can be the opportunity for a real tonic. Our high streets are starting to be lined with bunting, kitchens starting to resemble explosions in a jelly factory as families try to recreate the Platinum Jubilee trifle, and most importantly, the pressure on our weather forecasters to forecast some decent weather over the bank holiday weekend can't be understated. Mr. Deputy Speaker, Her Majesty represents the best of Britain. I thank her and wish her many, many more happy years as our sovereign.
Robert Jenrick.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker, and it's a great honour to join my right honourable friend, the Prime Minister, the Leader of the Opposition, and other colleagues across the House in our tribute to Her Majesty the Queen on the presentation of a humble address. I speak on behalf of my constituents in the ancient and loyal borough of Newark-on-Trent. Ancient because we received our royal charter from Her Majesty's forebear Henry II. Loyal because in May 1646, Newark was the last town in the royalist cause to surrender in the Civil War. It did so only upon receipt of a personal command from the King, who gave himself to the Scots outside the town. The town's defenders were impoverished, they were starving, they were ridden with disease, but all the contemporary accounts show they were entirely unrepentant and committed in their loyalty to the sovereign. Then, and more so in our modern democracy, the Crown relies on the loyalty of the people. Loyalty is a vague concept which can apply to many human situations. We can be loyal to our parents, our siblings, our friends, our employers, even, though this is less common, to party leaders. The loyalty which binds us to the Crown is peculiar because it's not based on any family tie or material consideration. In that sense, then as now, it has to be earned. And I'm sure that this whole House will agree that Her Majesty the Queen, over her uniquely long reign, has earned the loyalty of her country. The nation holds her in its hearts, not just as the figurehead of a great institution, but as an individual who has served our country with unerring grace, dignity, and decency. She has been a golden thread running through the weft and the weave of our lives. My grandmother joined her in the crowds that lined the Mall on VE Day. My father watched the coronation on a rented TV set, crowded into the front room of the one house on the street whose occupant could afford one. It was the first time he'd seen a TV other than in a shop window. Today he says that the thing he was struck by most was how beautiful the Queen looked, even on a terrible quality black and white TV. Afterwards he lit a bonfire with his friends in the middle of their street. It would be several years before the council filled in the pothole, so some things never change. Almost 70 years later, I had the privilege of meeting Her Majesty as a minister, often virtually, as Privy Council meetings were conducted during the pandemic. Samuel Pepys recorded that Newark's then representative during the Civil War communicated with the King by writing in cipher, concealing the script in a lead ball and asking the messenger to swallow it and then pass it out on arrival at the court. Fortunately for all concerned, Her Majesty has proven adept at using Zoom. Indeed, she always moves with the times. When I accompanied my Right Honourable friend, the Prime Minister, to the Palace in July 2019, after the short ceremony of giving us our seals of office had been completed and a few words were exchanged, Her Majesty said, and I hope this doesn't betray any confidence, "Well, I suppose we'd all better get back to work." And that was that. And I think that was her. She is an example of efficiency, of dedication, of common sense, of humility, and of good humour. Few countries, if any, have been as fortunate as ours to have such an anchor, bracing them against the storms, providing a well of consistency and certainty. Few countries are fortunate enough to have someone who can represent the whole nation, and we need that now more than ever. Few countries have benefited from such a capable and knowledgeable ambassador on the international stage. Indeed, she is arguably the most admired and respected public figure in the world today. Her Majesty the Queen has been guided by the pledge to serve, which she gave on her 21st birthday in 1947. The words were simple, and we as politicians know how easy it is to make promises and pledges. But the years have shown that they were uttered with deep conviction. The fulfillment of that promise has been the story of her life. I know my constituents in the loyal borough of Newark, and all of us in this House, would agree. Her Majesty the Queen has kept that pledge in full measure.
Liz Saville-Roberts.
Diolch yn fawr iawn, and I thank you for the opportunity to congratulate Queen Elizabeth on celebrating the remarkable milestone of reaching 70 years since she acceded to the throne. That is indeed what you call a lifetime of service. I would also like to take the opportunity to put on record my gratitude to the Queen and to Buckingham Palace, who this week, on Monday, planted the John Stimplin rose in the gardens. The rose was planted in memory of the life and legacy of John Stimplin, the first recorded black man, indeed black person, in North Wales, following his abduction as a child from Western Africa in the 18th century. The rose was launched in his honour by Harkness Roses and We Too Built Britain as part of their work of telling and uncovering the stories of underrepresented people. The rose is, therefore, a powerful symbol of friendship and love, kindness and community, and those visiting the gardens in Buckingham Palace will now have an opportunity to reflect on his story and what the rose represents for many years to come. And while we still have a very long way to go, the rose is, of course, also a reminder of how far we have come as a society in the last 70 years. As has been mentioned, in 1952, for example, there were just 17 women in Parliament. And in this Parliament now, we have 225 MPs who are women, and I am proud to be the first woman to lead the Plaid Cymru group in Westminster. As the leader of my party, Adam Price, noted in the Senedd in his tributes earlier this week, the Queen's first official visit to Wales, which was on the 28th of March in 1944, was also a momentous day for women's rights. This was the day on which MPs voted to pay women teachers the same as men. Same as men. Can you imagine that? Yeah. Paying teachers the same as men. And the opposition there was to that at the time as well. An important, indeed critical milestone in the wider struggle for equality. And during her reign, women have fought for and gained reproductive rights. We've made progress on equal pay with key legislation passed in the 1970s and 80s. And now there is a growing movement calling for the fair recognition of the work women do in caring for children and families. These are among the bright strands of social progress woven into the tapestry of the Queen's life and reign. The Queen has also been present for some of the most important events in recent history in Wales, our Wales as a nation. In 1999, the Queen was present for the inaugural opening of our Parliament. Over 2 decades later, the Queen returned last year to open our Parliament's 6th session. And in that time, our Parliament has become a Senedd, gained important legislative powers, and introduced legislation reflective of all the voices and aspirations of Welsh society. And now the Senedd is set to consider proposals for historic reforms which will pave the way for a stronger Welsh democracy, with a greater ability to improve the lives of people across our country, energise our politics, and make our elected Parliament fairer and more representative, and thus more effective. And to close, and to echo the comments of my right honourable friend, Lord Wigley of Carnarvon, neither am I instinctively a monarchist, but in her Jubilee year, I stand in respect of the remarkable way Her Majesty the Queen has carried out her responsibilities over the years with consistency, dignity and grace. She has been a constant figure in all our lives. A llongyfarchiadau a phob dymuniad da iddi hi. Diolch yn fawr iawn.
Well done. Jane Hunt.
Thank you very much, Mr. Deputy Speaker. My apologies. I am delighted to be able to participate in the debate today, and what an historic moment, being the first time we can celebrate a Platinum Jubilee in this place. I would like to join colleagues in wholeheartedly thanking Her Majesty the Queen on behalf of myself and all the residents of Loughborough, Shepshed, Barrow upon Soar, Quorn, Haddon, Sileby, Mount Sorrel and the Wolds villages for her lifetime of public service and her unwavering dedication to the people of the UK and those across the Commonwealth. What an impressive feat to be both the longest serving monarch in the UK and the third, soon to be the second, longest serving monarch ever to have lived. Loughborough has had the privilege of hosting Her Majesty on a number of occasions during her reign, including on the 28th of June 1996 to open the new English and Drama building at Loughborough Grammar School, which was named the Queen's Building in her honour. The deputy head of the school, John Whitesell, has shared the following anecdote with me from the visit. The Queen arrived in pouring rain to be greeted by the 2,000 children of Loughborough Schools Foundation. After formally opening the new English and Drama studio, as she entered the building for a tour, she gave instructions that the children should be returned to their respective schools rather than continue to get wet waiting for her. I chose to ignore the instructions. Unfortunately, the rain ceased, and after touring the building, she walked through the quad to the main hall. To me, this showed that she cared more about the children's welfare than I did. Her Majesty also visited on the 19th of April 1966, when she signed and sealed the Royal Charter of Incorporation that granted university status to Loughborough College of Technology. The new Loughborough University of Technology was the first technological university in England and Wales. Since then, the university has thrived, becoming the largest employer in Loughborough, with a global reputation for its cutting-edge theoretical and applied research. As Professor Nick Jennings, Vice-Chancellor at the university, has said, Loughborough University was granted its Royal Charter by Her Majesty in April 1966, and we are immensely proud of the success we have achieved through our teaching, research, enterprise and sport activities since that time. We have been honoured to receive 7 Queen's Anniversary Prizes, and it has also been a great privilege to host Her Majesty on campus several times, most notably in 2003 when she visited with the Duke of Edinburgh to open the ECB National Cricket Academy. Everyone at the university is excited and delighted that the Queen's Baton Relay will pass through the campus on the 11th of July as it makes its way to Birmingham for the Commonwealth Games. On behalf of all staff and students at Loughborough, I would like to thank Her Majesty for her 70 years of service to the country. We send our best wishes for the Platinum Jubilee celebrations. Of course, as well as academic achievements, Loughborough University is synonymous with sporting excellence, having trained many athletes who have gone on to represent the UK in international competitions, including the Commonwealth Games and the Olympic and Paralympic Games. I am proud to say that Loughborough is the unofficial home of the Commonwealth sport in England, and I share the Vice-Chancellor's delight that we will be hosting a leg of the Queen's Baton Relay. The Commonwealth is, of course, the jewel in the crown, and throughout her reign, Her Majesty has overseen its modernisation to ensure that it represents everyone and brings together communities from across the world. Indeed, shortly after her accession to the throne, Her Majesty stated that the Commonwealth bears no resemblance to the empires of the past. It is an entirely new conception built on the highest qualities of the spirit of man, friendship, loyalty, and the desire for freedom and peace. To that new conception of an equal partnership of nations and races, I shall give myself heart and soul every day of my life. Her Majesty has been absolutely true to her word, as it is this strong commitment to bridging the gaps between communities for their own betterment that this has been the common thread throughout her reign. In that same way, local residents in my constituency from all backgrounds will be coming together next weekend to celebrate Her Majesty's achievements. In Loughborough, from the 30th to the 31st of May, the Bell Foundry Museum is holding a Ring for Royalty event. There is also a Great Central Railway celebration on the 2nd of June, and on the same day, the lighting of the beacon in Queen's Park. Queen's Park is also playing host to a big lunch on the 5th of June. In addition, from the 2nd to the 5th of June, there are a number of Thorpeacre Village events, and from the 3rd to the 5th of June, the Wheeltapper Pub is holding a Jubilee party. In Shepshed, the Word of Life Church is holding a family fun day on the 3rd of June, and there is a Platinum Jubilee concert on the 4th of June at Glenmore Park. In Mount Sorrel, there is an afternoon tea dance at Memorial Hall on the 3rd of June. And throughout the week, the Peter Le Marchant Trust is running Jubilee boat trips, and on the 4th of June in Quorn, there is a Jubilee fair at Stafford Orchard. In Barrow-upon-Soar, there is a party in the park on the 4th of June, and in Wymswold on the 5th of June, there is a street party at the Stockwell. We are really very keen on the Queen. All these community events are a testament to the huge impact Her Majesty's hard work and dedication has had on the people of Loughborough, and indeed those from every corner of the world. I'm sure I speak for all of Loughborough when I say, God bless Her Majesty the Queen, and thank you.
Harry Sherman.
Mr. Speaker, I'm very conscious that as you were one of my university students a long time ago, you're expecting a lot of history, but having heard all the remarks so far on the great history, I'm getting rid of that. I haven't even had, I've had some dodgy ancestors, no one's ever been hung, drawn and quartered, or yet. But could I be very personal in terms of my respect and admiration and love for the Queen, and my pleasure at contributing to this address on her Platinum Jubilee. I was sitting doing my 11+ exam in Kennington Manor School in Sunbury-on-Thames, and I looked up from the paper and saw something strange. The caretaker was taking the flag down in a funny way. He was taking it down to half-mast. And so that early memory of mine was the sad time when George VI obviously passed away that night, and the Queen became the Queen Elizabeth II. I remember that very well. And of course, all of us have memories of our childhood, the bonfires, and the fun. No one actually said, I have the privilege, many of us in public life have had the luck of meeting the Queen on several times. And you know, it's the sense of fun that I think that I was most inspired by. I went, early on as a young member of Parliament, I went to a civic occasion because the President of Brazil was visiting. And I sat there, had a very nice time. The whole royal family was there. There were a couple of speeches. And then there was a melee where people went to get their own coffee. And suddenly I saw this small woman coming towards me, and my wife, and she said, you know, hello, I'm the Queen. She did. I think, and I was taken aback that she said, I understand you have 4 children. And we got into conversations. She has 4 children, we had 4 children. What a lovely conversation. And she said, could you tell me one thing? The violinist in the small band, he was wearing an earring on his ear. Does that mean anything special? And my wife and I looked at it in sort of some puzzlement and could not give her an answer. But it's a sense of fun. Every time I met her, there was something quite funny, quite mischievous, but lovely. I was lucky enough to work closely with the Duke of Edinburgh, both on his wonderful work on design and on a Royal Society of Arts and Manufacturers investigation into the future of the English countryside. And that was great joy because we met at the RSA and in Buckingham Palace. So I worked quite closely with him and just was astonished that the close relationship between them and also his sense of fun, because there was a Labour, a Conservative and a Lib Dem Lord on that commission, and he always had some little bit of information to tease you. But when you went to a reception, and we had a wonderful annual reception for a prize, the Duke of Edinburgh's Prize for Design, there would be a lovely party, and the Queen said to me, "You know my husband has a secret method when greeting people." He says he shakes them by the hand and sort of swings them away. And so for the rest of the evening, I watched the Duke of Edinburgh with his wonderful way of shaking the hand and throwing you on to the next business. So a sense of fun is something I remember. I also, because I'm a member of Parliament for Huddersfield, they love the Queen in Huddersfield, and we are a very diverse community, much more diverse than when she became Queen. And everybody in our community in Huddersfield loves, adores the Queen. And the Queen has come to our constituency twice, to my constituency, to the town. And those of you who don't live on the railway won't know this, but if the Queen comes into your constituency by train, the Mayor greets her and the Member of Parliament is the next to greet her. And the first time she came to Huddersfield, my wife was abroad. And I got in touch with the people organising the Queen's visit and said, would it be all right if I brought two of my children instead of my wife? And the message came back, yes, indeed. And so little John and little Verity came along with me to the station, and the Queen immediately stopped because it's quite unusual. All the rest were sort of boring middle-aged people, but she had these two children that she was delighted to meet and to have a conversation with. So it's those personal things that I remember. So 2 visits to Huddersfield. She was very well received, and again, a great fun. Can I also say, because it is, I don't want to go into too much detail of what we're doing to celebrate in Huddersfield, but we, like the Honourable Lady from Loughborough, we're going to have lots of events. And I indeed can remember that some of those events when I was little, of course. I don't want to give my age away, everybody knows it though. I saw my first television in black and white, the coronation service. Although I have to say it was in the next door neighbour's television, not our own. But one thing I do want to remind the House, that one of the special visits to Huddersfield, the Queen came to open Amateur Rugby League Centre. And what better time to remember the opening of the Amateur Rugby League Centre. And of course, those who are not so well up on Rugby League will perhaps not know that Rugby League was founded in 1895 in the George Hotel in Huddersfield. And it was founded because working men in the north of England had to work 6 days a week, and if they played sport, they lost a day's wages. And all the posh people in the south of England who played rugby said that would be disgraceful to give them the extra money that they lost for not working on that day. And in the end, they all met in the George in 1895 and said, we will start a new game called Rugby League, and with 13 in the team rather than 15, on rather different rules. And the only plug I will make, Mr. Deputy Speaker, is for the first time in very many years, Huddersfield are playing for the Silver Challenge Cup this weekend at Tottenham. So that's something that made me think of the Queen's visit. And the last thing I want to say is that we have had really tumultuous times, and we kind of forget them, don't we? We've gone through some really tough times in our country. We've had good moments, but we've had really tough times. We've had tough times when people in this house have not been very nice to each other. There are times when we have, I think, let ourselves down, and the whole country, became very divided on political grounds in the nasty sense of division. And I think the Queen should be recognised for being that ability to actually bring all those divisions together and be that act of unity. I know that the influence of the Queen over these years, behind the scenes, and I haven't been privy to those meetings with Prime Ministers or anyone else, but I know in my heart that the Queen's influence on calming down when elected politicians fall out, when we become too aggressive, too personal, too unpleasant to each other. She has been that calming influence behind the scenes and sometimes taking a profile in that calming process. Mr. Deputy Speaker, I'm proud to be here today, both personally and on behalf of my constituents in Huddersfield. Thank you.
Thank you. Charles Barrow.
Thank you very much, Mr. Deputy Speaker, and it's a great privilege and honour to congratulate Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth on her Platinum Jubilee on behalf of my constituents of North West Cambridgeshire. On a tour of Africa, the then 21-year-old Princess Elizabeth took a vow. That has been referred to by earlier speakers. And taking that vow, she declared, "I declare before you all that my whole life, whether it be long or short, shall be dedicated to your service." Mr. Deputy Speaker, Her Majesty has truly kept that vow. With her matchless sense of duty, she has worked tirelessly and given the nation and the Commonwealth 70 years of dedicated service. And throughout that period, until very recently, she had the unwavering support by her side of His Royal Highness, the Duke of Edinburgh. During Her Majesty's reign, there have been 14 UK Prime Ministers, the first being Sir Winston Churchill. There have been 14 US Presidents, starting with Harry S. Truman, and Pope Pius XII was the first of 7 popes. There have also been 10 speakers, beginning with William Morrison, covering 19 parliaments. And in 1952, there were only 8 Commonwealth countries, compared to the 54 that we now have. It has been an extraordinary reign, during which our country and the world has witnessed enormous change. To put matters into perspective, I was born in Kakira in Uganda, at a time when Uganda was still part of the British Empire. My family arrived here in the 60s, and now I, the son of an immigrant carpenter, proudly stand in this house, paying tribute to Her Majesty on behalf of my constituents from North West Cambridgeshire. Compared to 1952, there are now in the UK more opportunities for people to rise as far as their talent and ability will take them. More opportunities for education, home ownership, better health, more leisure time, and more prosperity generally. And of course, as has been referred to by previous speakers, we are a much more diverse nation, diversity of race, diversity of faith, and diversity of culture. And through it all, Her Majesty has provided continuity, a platinum thread through the decades, a voice for good, whose advice has been sought by world leaders across the four corners of the world. Her Majesty has also played a crucial constitutional role. She has been the guarantor of the constitutional integrity of our nation, providing stability and constancy throughout the decades. On a more local level, my constituency is relatively new, having been formed in 1997. It comprises the southern part of Peterborough and 100 or so villages, including many in the northern part of Huntingdonshire. Records show that in 1978, Her Majesty visited the National Shire Horse Society Centenary Show at Alwalton. She opened the Peterborough Building Society's head office at Lynchwood in 1988, and in 1991, there were traffic hold-ups as 3,000 extra visitors tried to see the Queen at the East of England show. Moreover, in June 2012, Her Majesty was the guest of Lady Victoria and Mr. Simon Leatham, marking the Queen's Diamond Jubilee picnic at Burghley House, when some 7,000 people came along to enjoy music and aerial displays. My constituency has changed in many ways in the past 70 years. A large part of it, the Peterborough part, was until 1974 part of Northamptonshire. However, whilst much has changed during Her Majesty's reign, some things are timeless. And I'm sure that were T.S. Eliot alive today, he would agree that the village of Little Gidding, of Four Quartets fame, is the same now as it was in 1945 when he published his poem. And something else that is timeless is the love and affection that my constituents feel for Her Majesty. Sir John Colville spoke for many when he said in his book, The Elizabethans, and I quote, "In an age of melting convictions and questionable needs, the Queen's unassuming virtues and faultless example have stood out like a rock in a sea of troubles." My congratulations again, and thank you, Your Majesty, for a lifetime of service to our nation and the Commonwealth.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. It is an honour to be here today to pay tribute to Her Majesty the Queen. The Queen truly defines our modern history. Through the 70 years she has reigned, huge changes have occurred. In 1952, when Princess Elizabeth acceded to the throne, Winston Churchill was the Prime Minister, tea was still being rationed, and British troops were still fighting the war in Korea. 14 Prime Ministers, 21,000 engagements, and 70 years later, Queen Elizabeth II is now Britain's longest reigning monarch, seeing us through every milestone in recent history. For a constant amidst such change, the Queen has been nothing but a loyal servant to her country, and across Barnsley we remain incredibly grateful for her work and service. Indeed, Her Majesty has visited Barnsley, most notably in July 1977, as part of her trip to Yorkshire on her Silver Jubilee tour. Now, in the coming days and weeks, our town once again will come together to mark the 70th year of the Queen's reign, her Platinum Jubilee. Bunting will decorate our town centre, and on the 2nd of June, a commemorative beacon will be lit in the Glassworks Square at the same time as over 2,000 across the country. Across the region, there will be a number of events, such as the service of celebration at Sheffield Cathedral. And as part of the Jubilee celebrations, we congratulate our neighbours in Doncaster for gaining city status. And I know my honourable friend, the member for Doncaster Central, is particularly pleased after all of her years campaigning for Doncaster to become a city. There will also be community events across Barnsley East, from Grimethorpe to Hoyland, such as the garden party at Old Martha's Yard, where there will be a brass band and maypole dancing. Brass bands remain popular in South Yorkshire, And I would like to pay tribute to the Grimethorpe Colliery Band, who performed Brass Stuff live at the Royal Albert Hall last night, 25 years after the iconic film was released. And it is great to hear that local schools will be holding celebrations too. Ellis C of E Primary, Jump Primary and Forest Academy are all hosting Red, White and Blue Days with lots of activities including special picnic lunches. Highview Primary and West Meadows are also hosting theme lunches, with the former creating an exhibition of work to commemorate each decade of the Queen's reign and the latter hosting a sports day and poetry recital. Jubilee celebrations provide a fantastic opportunity for people of all generations to come together and feel united as a community as we honour the contribution Her Majesty the Queen has made over the past 70 years. We thank her for her service. God save the Queen.
John Barron.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. And on behalf of my constituents, it is indeed a great privilege and honour to pay tribute to Her Majesty on her extraordinary achievement. We offer our deepest gratitude, thanks and congratulations for her sense of duty and public service, which has been the hallmark of her extraordinary long reign. A reign, I happen to believe, was also, at least in part, inspired by the love and dedication to her father, King George VI. Not many monarchs make their Platinum Jubilee, and this is yet another achievement in a long and accomplished reign. Now, the vast majority of us have known no other monarch, so we are true Elizabethans. In a changing world, she remains a fixed point. Across 7 decades, we have all benefited from Her Majesty's quiet authority, dignity, and firm understanding of the British people and our Constitution. She has also been a great unifying force across the UK. On the world stage, the Queen reigns supreme as a peerless ambassador, not only for the United Kingdom, but also for her example of selfless public service. She has been central in helping the country transition from empire to Commonwealth, to the benefit of all countries and peoples involved. And her dedication and energy in serving her people is unparalleled in our history, and we all owe the Queen a huge debt of gratitude. She reminds us that leadership is about serving, and above all, leading by example. At times, Her Majesty has steered a monarchy through challenging shoals, but there is little doubt that it is now in good stead for the future. We recall the extraordinary photograph in which she featured, along with the Prince of Wales, the Duke of Cambridge, and Prince George, our current Queen with the future 3 kings. In a sometimes uncertain world, the monarchy is an important strength and stay. In Her Majesty's address on her 21st birthday, she dedicated her life to the service of the Commonwealth and her people, whether it be long or short. We have been fortunate that she has been granted a long life, and long may she reign over us. And I know my constituents will join me as we all agree in this place when I say, God save the Queen.
Jim Shannon.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. You sort of threw me off there. I don't often get called just quite so early, so I'm very pleased to be called early. And thank you for giving me the opportunity to participate. It's been an honour to be an MP serving Her Majesty during this, her Platinum Jubilee. It was my honour as a much younger man to serve her with her, or serve in uniform for 14.5 years and serve Her Majesty. And now to serve in this House is something I do not take for granted, so I feel incredibly privileged, also incredibly humbled to be here today as well. I have many titles. It's husband, it's dad, it's granda, it's James by my mother, it's Jim by everybody that knew me from about 18-year-old. It's the honourable friend, unionist, loyalist, and more up to date, it's royalist. I was raised at a time in Northern Ireland when most houses had either a photo of the Queen or a photo of the Pope. I was raised with a photograph of the Queen. That won't be any surprise to anybody, but that was the Northern Ireland that we lived in. I have a great respect for her, for my family teaching, and this respect has only grown as I've watched Her Majesty over the years and been impacted by her unparalleled service, her matchless dignity, her peerless dedication, and her unrivaled work ethic. An ethic that generation and my parents' generation clearly had. To watch her composed face as she sat alone at Prince Philip's funeral, refusing to ask for special consideration, and in solidarity with the notion that she had not been the only person grieved, and she would do what her subjects were being asked to do, even at the very advanced age of 95, reaffirmed all I knew of the character of my Queen. The memory of her alone in that chapel touched many of us and encouraged us to know that we had the most heart-rending example in her display of duty and the very quiet dignity with which Queen Elizabeth II is synonymous with. The Honourable Member for Gainsborough, who's not here, referred to her Christian faith, and I want to refer to that because it's so important. I've watched it, and I do pray, as I pray for many people in this house, but I pray for Her Majesty every day and the royal family as well. In recent years, I've further been inspired by the very quiet faith which she holds so dear and which informs each aspect of her life. It has been wonderfully and reverently included in her annual Christmas speeches. And as one newspaper said, as Britain has become more secular, the Queen's messages have followed the opposite trajectory. For the past 17 years, Her Majesty has taken on a different tone, with the Queen explaining her own personal faith. And I wish to quote what she said on one of those occasions. For me, the life of Jesus Christ, the Prince of Peace, whose birth we celebrate today, is an inspiration and an anchor in my life, a role model of reconciliation and forgiveness. It stretched out his hands in love, acceptance and healing. Christ's example has taught me to seek to respect and value all people of whatever faith or none, as she described in 2014. And continuing, Her Majesty said, billions of people now follow Christ's teaching and find in him the guiding light for our lives. I am one of them because Christ's example helps me to see the value of doing small things with great love. How much those words of Her Majesty have encouraged me to live my faith in a respectful, personal, yet a very open way, attempting to at all times to speak the truth in love. I know that many of us who love this institution, this house, this wonderful tradition we have here, will also love the lady herself, have been concerned recently that the Queen's mobility is a sign of greater concerns. And yet I take great comfort in the measured way in which her heirs, the Prince of Wales and the Duke of Cambridge, are coming forward with a very steady hand. When we look at the Duke and Duchess of Cambridge with a modernised approach, soundly built in the historic foundation laid by Her Majesty, it is crystal clear that our monarchy will continue on as an example of selfless duty and service. Back in 2012, Mr Deputy Speaker, I had occasion to bring my mother and father over to the garden party. It was their first and only time they were ever there, but it was Prince Philip and the Queen who were coming round. My mum was 81, my dad was 83, so the people who were there at the garden party were very kind. And they managed to find chairs. I think there's plenty of chairs about, but they went and got chairs for mum and dad to sit at as the Prince Philip and the Queen came round. That was probably one of the best occasions of my parents' life. They were absolutely enthralled. My mum, she was really interested in all the vol au vents and wee small cakes and sweet stuff. My dad, he was interested in the garden, so the two of them had an absolutely fantastic time. They talked about that for many, many years after. So that garden party, and I know they didn't get to meet the Queen and Prince Philip directly. I think whenever the Queen came round, she's seen them in the chair, and of course she made it her business to acknowledge them, which of course made my mum and dad's day. And my constituency of Strangford is full of royalists. I won't say loyalists, but they are loyalists as well, but they're also royalists. And there will be dozens of Platinum Jubilee parties and events taking place the weekend after next. It will be no surprise to learn that in my office is full of royalists as well. My parliamentary aide was beside herself when she was able to attend the Queen's Garden Party this year, just 2 weeks ago, after 18 years of working with me. But the joy I take is in seeing my two younger staff members in their 20s excited to see what the Duchess of Cambridge is up to, and talking of their respect for her grace and dignity in the face of adversity. It bodes well for the future, and I think we should be encouraged that Her Majesty is leading the royal family in a way that I believe will continue for the future. So not only do I admire Her Majesty for who she is, but I admire her steady hand on the legacy that she's leaving with Prince Charles, Prince William, and even on to little Prince George, who's a special place in all of our hearts. In a world of celebrity motivated by numbers of likes on a tweet, empty sermonising and self-service hailed as worthy of admiration, we're able to see the epitome of promise fulfilled when at her coronation she made her pledge. Honourable Gentleman for Cambridgeshire referred to it. I want to refer to it as well, because I've often thought about those words, because they're good words for each of us, I believe, Mr Deputy Speaker, that we should, and I quote, "I declare before you all that my whole life, whether it be long or short, shall be devoted to your service. Her Majesty has done this and more in every one of those 70 years. A lady of refinement, of grace, of selfless dedication to duty and service, of diligence, of intelligence, humour, wit and faith. I could not be prouder to be British, and I always am very pleased to say I'm British, and claim her as my Queen. Long may she continue to reign over us. Indeed it is for me and for all of us in this House. God save the Queen." Thank you.
Nick Drummond.
Mr Deputy Speaker, and it is an honour to speak in support of this humble address to Her Majesty the Queen on behalf of my constituents in Meon Valley. I was delighted yesterday to discuss Her Majesty's long service with some children from Denmead Junior School in my constituency who were here on a visit with the wonderful Parliamentary Education Centre, and they were in the Monarch Room. I met a group of school counsellors and we discussed how their work as representatives of their classes mirrors the work that we do here in Parliament representing our constituents. I mentioned that I would be speaking today in this debate and asked them what messages they thought they would like to send to Her Majesty. The first response is they would like to say thank you to her for being a really nice monarch. Another response that Her Majesty has been amazing and helped our country. One remark, which I thought showed a precocious understanding of our Constitution, said, "Her Majesty uses her powers wisely." Sir Walter Bagehot would approve. With her expertise in our nation's affairs, stretching from Sir Winston Churchill to the present day, covering 14 Prime Ministers, I am sure that she's always been a wise counsel to those who carry on the business of government in her name. I was also asked to pass on the children's thanks for all her patience and hard work. Everyone recognises how hard Her Majesty has worked throughout her life, but I was struck by the word patience. Her Majesty has remained patient and dignified, despite some vicious commentary in the media at times about her and her family, and I think we can all here empathise with that. I was pleased the children recognised that there are bound to be times when being our sovereign is not easy or without complications, and yet Her Majesty has remained dignified and resolute. And lastly, the Council thanked Her Majesty for helping lots of different countries. Her Majesty began her life as the daughter of a king emperor, and during her own reign has seen the transformation of lives of millions upon millions of people into democratic, self-governing societies. Most of them have retained their links to us and to each other through the Commonwealth. In many cases, these links have been strengthened through migration. As head of the Commonwealth, Her Majesty has been the most respected figure in world affairs throughout her reign. I know this Jubilee will be marked around the world as an expression of love for our sovereign. My own life began in Aden, which was a British protectorate, and I spent most of my childhood in Commonwealth countries in the Middle East while my father served Her Majesty for 46 years. In every country, Her Majesty is recognised as a symbol of stability and continuity. Many millions of people, like my father, have now served in the name of Her Majesty, and she herself is a veteran, having served in the Auxiliary Transport Service during World War II. In the armed forces, she and other women of her generation were trailblazers in their roles which had previously not been open to them. And over the years, their successors have now been able to break into more and more careers previously reserved for men. In the armed forces in particular, I'm pleased that we're finally doing away with the last anachronisms of ranks, which reflect an assumption that they are held by men. But I'd just like to end by just reflecting again on how pleased I was at the response of children I met at Denmead Junior School yesterday. It gives me confidence that Her Majesty's examples of the values we should all aspire to and hope that our children adopt continue to resonate with people whose own lives will stretch well beyond our own. Long may she reign.
Gerald Jones.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. It's a pleasure to be called in this debate today to mark the Platinum Jubilee of Her Majesty the Queen. on behalf of constituents across Merthyr Tydfil and Rhymney. As has been said, most people in this country simply do not remember a time when the Queen was not there, as the ever-present and reassuring presence that she's been through dramatically changing times. Over 70 years. In itself, a truly remarkable achievement. I'd like to take the opportunity briefly to reflect on the links between the Queen and my constituency. In my own case, there have been a number of examples of visits to Merthyr Tydfil and Rhymney, none more poignant than the multiple visits Her Majesty the Queen has made to the village of Aberfan. The first visit just days after the tragedy in October 1966, and the most recent to open the new Annis Owen Community Primary School in Aberfan as part of the Diamond Jubilee Tour in April 2012. I know many people in Aberfan and across the constituency appreciate the special bond that they have with the Queen and the royal family. Mr Deputy Speaker, I believe sincerely that the Queen and the royal family are a huge asset to our country. The Queen in particular is there to represent the whole nation and be a conduit for national events, but also to provide reassurance in difficult times. The Queen is a uniting factor for all the nations and regions across the whole of the UK, an unwavering constant in a changing world. The Honourable Lady for Dwyfel Meirionnydd spoke earlier about the links to Wales, and I think it's important to recognise that for every opening session of the Assembly and now Senedd, the Queen has been present to open officially from 1999 until October last year when the latest Senedd was opened. From a young age, I have been always passionate about community and particularly community spirit. One of my earliest recollections is taking part as a 6-year-old in the Silver Jubilee street party with friends and neighbours in the same street where I still live, albeit in a different house, and where we'll be having a street party a week on Sunday in the same way that we did for the Golden and Diamond Jubilees. Community spirit is still very much alive in many of our communities. Whilst it's not as strong as it once was, it is still there. Most people live very busy and certainly very different lives to those of our parents and grandparents in 1952. However, if people are given a reason to come together from time to time, that community spirit comes very much to the fore. And I believe there's no better focus to bring communities together in a positive way than a Jubilee or a royal event. Our communities have been through a very difficult 2 years, and what the whole country went through together as a collective was extremely painful. However, as painful as it was, the positive, if there was a positive, is that it seemed to rekindle a community spirit in many areas. People were once again on hand to help their friends and particularly their vulnerable neighbours, and I've spoken to a number of people who set up WhatsApp groups and chat groups with their neighbours to get through the pandemic, but many have kept that communication going. Across my constituency, I'm aware of a number of events being held to celebrate the Jubilee. Indeed, this week, Twitter and Facebook have been full of activities going on in local schools. Tomorrow, I'll be attending a number of Jubilee celebrations in local schools. And next week, there are church services, afternoon teas, photo displays across the Queen's Reign, carnivals, fun days, a night of nostalgia and 50s music, a beacon lighting in Penderyn Square in Merthyr Tydfil and in other areas across the constituency, and of course street parties. Some organised, some on a more informal basis. But all of these events will have two things in common. First, to mark the Queen's service to our communities and our country over 70 years, but it will also bring people together in a national celebration, a fitting tribute to acknowledge Her Majesty's service to our communities and our country, and indeed the Commonwealth. It's also worth highlighting that the Jubilee will also support the local and indeed the national economy. I've spoken to organisers of community events over the Jubilee weekend who have commented on the difficulties they've had in securing things for their events. One told me they had difficulty in hiring a face painter for the children, stating that people that they'd contacted had told them that they'd been booked for weeks, but in the last month were having 3 or 4 calls a day for bookings over the Jubilee weekend. Other organisers have said they're struggling to get cabaret artists for the Jubilee weekend, being told by agents that their acts have been booked up for months in advance. And some organisers have even struggled to hire portaloos for outside events. I hope they're successful in getting those. But in all seriousness, I think it represents the scale of activity going on across the Jubilee weekend. It will certainly be busy in many communities with a range of events, but it will inevitably lead to that boost for the local and national economy. In conclusion, Mr Deputy Speaker, I return to the role of the Queen herself. For over 70 years, as we know, she's been a constant. She's demonstrated a lifelong commitment to the service of the nation and the Commonwealth. She is the longest reigning head of state in the world, the longest reigning monarch in British history, the longest reigning female monarch in history, and, as Mr Speaker said in the opening address read by Madam Deputy Speaker, the third longest reigning monarch in world history. But just as an update, in just over 20 days' time, she will become the second reigning longest serving monarch in world history, and only 2 years to overtake Louis XIV to become the longest. That's some achievement. As we've heard, on her 21st birthday, Princess Elizabeth said, "My whole life, whether it be long or short, will be devoted to your service." A statement that was sincere and has been evidenced by the exemplary service over 70 years. And I know the whole House will agree that the Jubilee is a time for great celebration, but I hope too that it will be an opportunity to thank the Queen for her service and will reinforce to Her Majesty just how much love and respect people across the UK and the Commonwealth have for her in this Jubilee year. Thank you.
Richard Drax.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. It's a pleasure to follow the Honourable Member and to follow all the gracious speeches right across the House. And what an honour and a privilege it is for me personally to speak on behalf of my constituents from South Dorset, a very loyal county, to mark the Queen's remarkable 70-year reign, Mr Deputy Speaker. In fact, the monarch's longevity is such that Platinum Jubilee is not defined in the compact Oxford English Dictionary, whereas Golden Jubilee is. The publication refers to the latter as the, quote, the 50th anniversary of a significant event. It certainly was. But can I make a suggestion for the former? Perhaps it could be defined as, and I quote, the 70th anniversary of our great national treasure who epitomises grace, dignity and duty. I would like to remind the House of the quote that several members have used, and maybe they've been looking at my speech and cheating, but it is a very appropriate quote that she then made, Princess Elizabeth, on her 21st birthday to the Commonwealth, and I want to repeat it because I think it really is so powerful and so simple. She said, "I declare before you all that my whole life, whether it be long or short, shall be devoted to your service." Our Queen has kept her word, and we are all the richer for it. I have had the honour and pleasure to serve the Queen for 9 years in the Armed Forces and to meet her in person twice. It is appropriate, therefore, to mention next Thursday Trooping the Colour, because I recall with great clarity and pride being on parade for 3 of them many years ago. There's a moment during the march past in slow time that you salute Her Majesty with your sword. The movement is a graceful, flowing one, and with your head firmly to the right, you look directly at the Queen. It's quite a moment. Her expression is impassive, but you know, we all knew, that every movement is being scrutinised and any slip-up noted. Her attention to detail is legendary, and for those who get it wrong, really quite scary. The loyalty the Queen commands from the military is one of the many reasons our armed forces are the best in the world. Many friends who fought in the Falklands War told me that their best friend was the soldier beside them, but the loyalty to Queen and country too drove them to commit acts of bravery that no one, under normal circumstances, would consider doing. It's called service and sacrifice, which in my humble opinion epitomises the Queen. As I've said, I've met the Queen twice. On the first occasion, our battalion, based at Wellington Barracks, not far from here of course, was graced not just by one Queen, but 2, the Queen and Queen Mother. They were attending the presentation of new colours, and that photograph hangs proudly on my wall. The second occasion was when Her Majesty opened the Weymouth and Portland National Sailing Academy prior to the Sailing Games in my constituency. The many attendees were formed into groups of about 8, and we watched and waited as the Queen and the Duke of Edinburgh worked the room, stopping to talk to every single one of us. I wondered then just how many times the couple had done this, and I marvelled at their nobility, patience, we've heard that word many times today, and endurance. The room was abuzz, Mr. Deputy Speaker. The reception of the royal couple received close on adoration. However, this was not some infatuation. It was a mixture of respect and affection generated by years of flawless service. Finally, I'm sure that like many in the House, I watched The Crown. I paid little or no attention to the tittle-tattle in the script. But I was blown away by the historical sweep of the Queen's life and the role she has played in our island's history for 96 years. I was so moved, I wrote to her, simply to say thank you for a life of sacrifice and duty and a glorious reign that history will record for future generations to come. God bless the Queen.
Mary Glendon.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. And it's an honour to follow the Honourable Gentleman from South Dorset, because I believe it's about 12 years since I followed his maiden speech to make my maiden speech in the Chamber in June 2010. And it's also, Mr. Deputy Speaker, both an honour and a pleasure to take part in this humble address debate in honour of our Queen's 70th Jubilee. My late parents, like many of their generation, were contemporaries of Her Majesty and other members of the royal family, and always held the royal family in great admiration. I, just like my parents, am a proud royalist, and I have enjoyed celebrating many royal events since my childhood. My parents, with several members of the family, were fortunate to get tickets for seats on the Mall for the coronation in 1953, and we still have those tickets as my dear aunt kept them as a memento. I always loved listening to my mother recalling her memories of the day, of her watching the procession in the rain. And something that always struck me, she said she remembered watching the Queen appearing a tiny figure waving from the gold stage coach. And I have a television story too, to add to that of the Honourable Member from Uwick and the Honourable Member, my friend from Huddersfield. The street that I knew there was a television in was my late husband's street, and it was his family who had the tiny television. And my husband was about 6 at the time, and he said the house was full of neighbours and people trying to peer through the window to watch the coronation on the tiny set. And I think that just shows how people were so interested in such a big event. And indeed, the people of North Tyneside have always given the Queen and her late beloved husband, the Duke of Edinburgh, and all the royal family a great welcome whenever they visit our region. The North East has a great affection and deep respect for Her Majesty, and thousands will be joining in the Jubilee celebrations. And I'm very much looking forward to attending several events in my constituency, starting this weekend when I'll be joining the Wide Open and North Gosforth Community Association at Davison Hall for their early weekend-long Jubilee event. I won't be able to be there all weekend. But on this, and then on the 2nd of June, I will celebrate with the Residents Association of Yeoman Street in North Shields, the street next to where I was brought up, at their Jubilee Street Party. And I'll round off the celebrations on the 5th of June at the Long Benton Estate Jubilee Party taking place in the local community garden. And I say, as others have, fingers crossed for good weather. Mr. Speaker, on behalf of everyone in North Tyneside constituency, I wish to thank the Queen for her years of dedication and service to our country and Commonwealth, and to congratulate her on her historic Platinum Jubilee. May God grant her good health for years to come.
James Wilde.
Thank you very much, Mr. Deputy Speaker, and it's a pleasure to rise to support this humble address to Her Majesty the Queen. And in doing so, I'm mindful that while all my constituents are important, the Queen, through her Sandringham estate, is undoubtedly the most special. And Sandringham, in my North West Norfolk constituency, has long been held in affection by the royal family, with George V describing "Dear old Sandringham, the place I love better than anywhere in the world." And having ascended to the throne at the age of 21, the Queen has lived her life in the public eye. But it's Sandringham that offers a retreat and a place for family gatherings where she can enjoy privacy, relaxation, and of course her country pursuits. And it was Sandringham where the Duke of Edinburgh, who played such an immensely important role in supporting Her Majesty, chose to spend his time when he retired from public life to enjoy the sanctuary that it offers. And the continuity Sandringham has provided through 4 generations mean her Norfolk home occupies a unique place in the Queen's affections. Now, her love of horses has been well remarked upon in this debate, and a racehorse stud was first established there by Edward VII. And the Queen's expertise is demonstrated by her success on the turf. Just last weekend, one of her horses, King's Lynn, was a winner at Haydock Park, and it's expected to run at Royal Ascot next month. And if I can offer the House another tip, the bookies are offering odds of 14-1 at the moment, which I think is a pretty good price. And although it is foremost a family home, perhaps known most famously for that Christmas Day walk with the Queen and the royal family to the church in Sandringham, Her Majesty is much loved by the communities, the close-knit villages around Sandringham, and is a very special part of those communities. Communities who let the royal family and the Queen go about their business largely without fuss. Indeed, on one occasion it's reported that in a shop, a local assistant said, "You look just like the Queen," to which the Queen is said to have replied, "How reassuring." And Her Majesty is a stalwart of that other constant in our nation, the Women's Institute, having been a member of the Sandringham branch since 1943. A few years ago, as they marked their centenary, the branch took part in a version of the TV quiz Pointless, with the Queen naturally leading her team to victory. And on that occasion, she said, "Of course, every generation faces fresh challenges and opportunities. As we look for new answers in the modern world, I, for one, prefer the tried and tested recipes, like speaking well of each other and respecting different points of view, coming together to seek the common ground and never losing sight of the bigger picture." Those words capture the essence of Her Majesty the Queen's dignified approach to leading our nation over the last 70 years. And across North West Norfolk, the Queen is greatly loved. And to celebrate this extraordinary year, we'll be having events, beacons will be lit, street parties will be held. There'll be a musical royal salute involving over 1,000 school children and adults, as well as new trails and paths opening up areas of the countryside that are special to Her Majesty, and much, much more. And all of those events are a very fitting way for my other North West Norfolk constituents to honour her continuing remarkable service to our country.
Brian Clark.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. It's an honour and privilege to speak in this humble address to Her Majesty. I want to echo the words we have heard from honourable and right honourable members across this House and wish Her Majesty the very best on the occasion of her Platinum Jubilee. The warmth and affection we have seen towards Her Majesty from all sides, and a place where we often disagree, shows how important a figurehead she has been for our country over the last 70 years. One of the few constants throughout the incredible change we have seen in that time has been Her Majesty's steadfast service, despite the many challenges she and our country have faced. It is not too fanciful to say she has now become the metaphorical mother of the nation. Her commitment to our country has been truly unwavering, and we all owe her a debt of immense gratitude. My constituency of Enfield North has a number of celebrations taking place to mark Her Majesty's Platinum Jubilee. My own diary includes street parties across the borough of Enfield, a civic reception at the Town Hall, parties at Totteridge Road Church and the Nursery on the Green, and I'm sure all of them will be fantastic events that bring our community together on this very special occasion. I'm particularly looking forward to my visit to Bush Hill Park Primary School tomorrow afternoon to join pupils and teachers in their Jubilee celebrations. The pupils there have been learning about the incredible change we have seen over Her Majesty's reign and will be commemorating the occasion through parades, poetry and song. And I'm sure the pupils have put a lot of work into their preparation and that they will make themselves, their teachers and parents and Her Majesty herself proud.
Yeah.
Mr. Deputy Speaker, events like this show the warmth and respect the people of this country have for Her Majesty. And like all members, I hope the strong community spirit we are seeing ahead of these celebrations may long continue. Finally, on behalf of myself and my constituents of Enfield North, I would like to send our very best wishes to Her Majesty as she celebrates her Platinum Jubilee. Long may she reign over us.
Yeah.
Colin Johnson.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. Mr. Deputy Speaker, it's a great honour to speak in this tribute debate to Her Majesty the Queen on the occasion of her Platinum Jubilee. The celebration of Her Majesty's Jubilee will involve many parties and much joy, but it will also be a thank you to Her Majesty, who said 70 years ago, as others have said today, that her whole life, will it be long or short, would be dedicated to service, and indeed she has done so, serving our country with grace, with dignity and with love. During her reign, the Queen has met many, many people. A YouGov poll back in 2018 found that around a third of the population have seen or met the Queen in real life. And for each one, it is a special and much treasured moment and memory. The same is, of course, true for me, Mr. Deputy Speaker. I was 17 years old, a student at Gordonston in Scotland, when Her Majesty came to visit my school. I vividly remember the excitement, the preparations. These preparations did not just include mowing the lawn, Mr. Deputy Speaker, but cleaning the gutters and repainting the white lines on the speed bumps so that everything was perfect for her arrival. I remember the excitement that I, a mere scholarship student, had been chosen to sit opposite Her Majesty for lunch. And I remember the worry too. What if they give us spaghetti bolognese? How will I manage? I need not have worried. The Queen was truly charming, and as many have observed today, she is wonderful at making people feel relaxed and at ease in any circumstance. My particular memories from that dinner are firstly discussing travel. It was fascinating to hear of the Queen's many visits to and love for her Commonwealth. It was also interesting to reflect on how her visits to a country differ from those of her subjects. There are many places, I realised, that she can go and see that I can't. But there are actually also many places that I can go and see that she can't. My second memory of the lunch was that as it came to an end, there was to be a music recital, and the Queen moved round to get a better view, coming to sit right next to me. I remember how surreal it felt. It feels surreal to describe it, actually. An ordinary girl from Middlesbrough sat next to this completely magnificent woman. The Honourable Member for Huddersfield earlier spoke of how the Queen has a great sense of fun. And as I remember sitting there, lost for words, some may not believe this, but I was, feeling in awe and unsure what to say, when Her Majesty asked, would anyone like any more of those fudge squares? We, on our best behaviour, of course, said, no, thank you. And she picked the tea plate up, opened her bag, and with a twinkle in her eye, tipped the fudge inside, declaring them as good for the train later. We weren't sure whether these were for the corgis, for her, or for the grandchildren, but nevertheless it added some of her gentle humour to proceedings. Throughout the House there will be many, many memories to share, as there are across my constituency. Some of my constituents will remember her visits that she's undertaken locally, in particular to RAF Cranwell. Some were also well known to her son, the Prince of Wales, as he began his armed services career there in March 71. I've been delighted that a wealth of aircraft have this week been taking to the skies over RAF Cranwell to rehearse the flypast due to take place next week for Her Majesty's Jubilee, with more than 70 aircraft, including the Red Arrows, Spitfires and Hurricanes, set to be on display. But the nation, Mr. Deputy Speaker, is not just coming together in London, but it's coming together in every village across our country. Preparations are underway across Sleaford and North Hykeham to celebrate Her Majesty's 70 years of service. In the village of Osenby, like back at school those years ago, they're ensuring the place is spick and span before the Jubilee celebrations, with a village tidy up on the 29th of May to make sure that everything is just lovely. Many villages like Sudbrook are having street parties and cake competitions, but others are doing some interesting and unusual ways of celebrating the Jubilee. For example, in North Kyme, where there will be a Jubilee-themed scarecrow competition. In North Kyme, they will also light one of the 2022 charity beacons that will be lit across the UK for the Jubilee weekend. In Metheringham, they have a competition for the best poem about the Queen, the best dedicated crown, and I'm sure Her Majesty will approve of the dog and pet show. In North Skál, they are producing a quilt with members of the community, each stitching a 9-inch square. And I noted that the instructions said, "Our Queen is thrifty. We'd expect you to upcycle or recycle the materials, not simply buy them." In Potter Hanworth, each child of primary school age will be provided with a beautiful, and it is truly beautiful, medal in a little gift box to celebrate and remember this momentous occasion. Brant Bruton are doing similar with commemorative mugs for all children under the age of 18. But however my constituents remember the Jubilee in the next week, the common thread running through all of these celebrations will be a gratitude for Her Majesty, all that she has done, all that she will do in the future, admiration for how she does it, and a genuine love for our Queen. I would like to offer thanks to Her Majesty on behalf of all my constituents. Thank you, Your Majesty. Congratulations on your Platinum Jubilee. God save the Queen.
Morgan Ferrier.
Deputy Speaker, it's a pleasure to speak in this humble address on behalf of my constituents. Nobody can deny Her Majesty's dedication to public service to her country. 70 years is a lifetime, certainly much longer than most when it comes to working life. Her Majesty has been on the throne for longer than many of us have been alive. An international symbol that instantly springs to mind when you think of the United Kingdom, the Queen and the Royal Estate are a huge draw for tourists from around the globe. Even now, at the very grand age of 96, she remains dedicated to her role and to the people. Her Majesty is notably the most travelled of any monarch to precede her, and in the Commonwealth alone has made in excess of 250 visits over her lifetime, from Canada to France, and who could forget, of course, Rutherglen. Rutherglen was granted royal borough status in the year 1126 by David I of Scotland, at a time before Glasgow was the powerhouse it is in modern times, and Rutherglen was much larger in size comparatively. On the 25th of June 1953, only a couple of weeks after her coronation, the Queen and the late Duke of Edinburgh visited. It had been quite the day. They were coming to Rutherglen following engagements in Glasgow. Residents of Rutherglen turned out in force to greet the young new monarch. It was a beautifully sunny day and thousands lined Main Street, waiting for a glimpse of Her Majesty. Children in particular were excited to see her, taken from schools to see the visit, screamed in delight when her car passed. She remarked to the Provost that she had never seen so many children turn up at a visit. The Provost said that the children had given them the kind of reception only children can give. Those children will be well into old age now, in their 70s and 80s. Her Majesty took tea in the town hall before signing the visitors' book, and then off she went to Rutherglen train station, to the Royal train and on to the next destination. Even more popular with Her Majesty is Blantyre, also in my constituency. She has visited several times. In 1929, when she was still Princess Elizabeth and a small child accompanying her mother, who opened the David Livingstone Museum. The museum, which I brought to the attention of the Leader of the House just 2 weeks ago, is still going strong. It's recently been completely refurbished, and I'm sure she would love to visit it again and see what has changed. In 1942, she visited again as part of a series of visits designed to boost wartime morale. And in 1962, after she was crowned, she visited again to the train station as she made her way back from a visit to East Kilbride. This year's celebrations will be more modest in the constituency. Rutherglen West and Wardlaw Hill Parish Church will be hosting a street party following the success of the party they threw for the Diamond Jubilee, which made it on to BBC News. Rutherglen Community Council have decided to establish a subgroup to launch a more permanent legacy to Her Majesty's 70-year reign.
The Community Council are pulling together a 5-year plan which they hope the local community can be actively involved in. I understand there are a few smaller private celebrations being held around Rutherglen too in the form of lunches and teas hosted by members of the community. And I'm looking forward to attending a beacon lighting hosted by North Lanarkshire Council, supported by South Lanarkshire Council. The invitation came from the Lord Lieutenant of Lanarkshire, Lady Susan Hawkey. Lady Hawkey and other Lord Lieutenants across the UK are the Queen's personal representative in each lieutenancy area. These days it's more of an honorary title presented to persons of note in each area, but historically each Lord Lieutenant had military responsibilities. In summary, Mr Deputy Speaker, my constituency has long had royal connections, and I admire Her Majesty's 70-year contribution to public life. That sense of duty and that enduring commitment is worthy of our celebration.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. Short of words is not a condition that many people associate with me. But I don't mind telling the House that I have struggled to put into words on this occasion how much I and so many people across Rushcliffe admire Her Majesty the Queen and how much all of us as a country owe to her. Although colleagues will see, I have got through it. History is populated by many great figures. Great leaders like George Washington, Winston Churchill, Margaret Thatcher. Great scientists like Isaac Newton, Charles Darwin and Marie Curie. Great authors like Jane Austen or William Shakespeare. But the measure most often used to define historical eras is the reigns of great individual monarchs or families. The Tudors, for example, or the Stuarts. And the reigns of the greatest monarchs name entire eras, like the Victorians. The question, Mr Deputy Speaker, sorry, I promoted you prematurely, is what future historians will make of our era. What will they call us? I have a prediction. I believe we will be a first. I think that for the first time in history, an era will supplant an earlier one and take its name. I refer, of course, to the Elizabethans. Historically, the era we call Elizabethan stretched from 1558 to 1603, the reign of Elizabeth I. She represents a great era, with everything from our discovery of the Americas and the defeat of the Spanish Armada to the invention of the first flush toilet. But I believe that era is fated to be subsumed into the broader Tudors, and 500 years from now, when people talk about the Elizabethan era, they will talk about the reign of Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth II. For her reign is longer, more significant, and more transformative. Throughout it, as Mr Speaker himself has said, our country and our world has changed almost beyond recognition. In eras past, the monarch was a remote, distant, and unseen figure. And now, for the first time in history, our Queen has had a direct impact on a huge number of us. As the Right Honourable Gentleman, the leader for the opposition, has said, she is one of the most famous faces in the world, although perhaps not to everyone everywhere. I recall the famous story of the time Her Majesty drove herself to the Royal Windsor Horse Show. Greeted by a guard who didn't recognise her, she was told, "Sorry, love, you can't come in without a sticker." The Queen, unfazed, replied, "I think if you check, I will be allowed in." The Queen has transformed the relationship between the royal family and us, her subjects. For decades, she has been a steadying force at the heart of our country, but also a role model to so many. She epitomises duty, public service, and a tireless commitment to this country and to the Commonwealth. For the last 70 years, Her Majesty the Queen has worked on our behalf. And now, at the moment of her Platinum Jubilee, we come together to congratulate her, to celebrate her, and to thank her for everything she has done for us. And it's my privilege to speak today as the Member of Parliament for Rushcliffe, to thank and congratulate Her Majesty and to wish her well on behalf of our community. You see, in Rushcliffe we have a proud tradition of supporting Her Majesty and welcome her when she visits. For example, at the time of the Silver Jubilee in 1977, Her Majesty came to Trent Bridge Cricket Ground. She met the England and Australia teams during the Ashes Test. We went on to win that Ashes series. Here's hoping her talismanic properties see us reclaim the Ashes next year. I often visit schools and community groups in my constituency, and I'm struck by the awe and respect shown by everyone to our Queen. Her Majesty has seen political upheaval, personal tragedy, historic moments, and great milestones. She has always done so with a stoic and steely determination. Her personal sacrifice, sense of duty, and commitment to public service, Mr. Speaker, has inspired many people to serve their local communities. And next week, it's also Volunteers Week, a time to celebrate and thank all volunteers in our communities. And in Rushcliffe, this includes the Trent First Responders, the Cockgrave Community Kitchen and Garden, Severday, Renew 37, our parish councillors, the Friary, Ruddington Museum, the Framework Knitters Museum, Tara's Angels, and all of those who lead the scouting and guide movements, amongst many others. And it strikes me, Mr. Deputy Speaker, that the real tribute to Her Majesty is not just the celebrations we will have over the weekend, but the tireless work of the many volunteers at the heart of our communities that epitomise the service and duty she has shown. Yeah.
Ordnance survey maps have one of my villages, Dunsop Bridge, at the very centre of the United Kingdom. It's even marked by a special telephone box. So on behalf of the people of the Ribble Valley, at the very centre of Her Majesty's kingdom, can I say, Your Majesty, thank you from the bottom of our hearts. I, like many of you, I've listened to these wonderful speeches, will be celebrating over the next 4 days, attending many occasions, including the inevitable street party. And I shall really be looking forward to that, because we will be royally celebrating this historic time in our nation's history. How exciting is it for all of us to be alive at this time as history is made? God save the Queen. The question is that an humble address be presented to Her Majesty as on the order paper. As many of that opinion say aye. Aye. Contrary no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it.
I beg to move that this House do now adjourn.
The question is that this House do now adjourn. Philip Oliver.
Mr. Deputy Speaker, thank you very much indeed. What a pleasure it is to see you in the chair. Could I thank Mr. Speaker for granting me permission for this debate, and could I welcome the Minister to her place on the front bench. The issue before us today is Her Majesty's Government's proposed deposit return scheme for drinks containers, whereby consumers will pay a small levy upon purchasing a drink, which is then refunded once the container is returned to a collection point. And specifically, I wish to raise my serious concerns that glass bottles are to be excluded from the scheme. Now, the omission of glass represents a real and serious threat to the effectiveness of which a deposit return scheme in England and Northern Ireland can realistically be delivered. Quite simply, its exclusion would be a potential catastrophe for our natural spaces as we all look to stem the tide of drink container pollution. But it also represents a direct betrayal of a promise made by the Conservative Party to voters at the last general election, when we said in the manifesto that we would introduce a deposit return scheme for both plastic and glass drink containers. I wish to use this debate today, Mr. Deputy Speaker, to urge Her Majesty's Government to rectify this as a matter of urgency and to immediately revisit the scheme's design so as to include drinks containers made from glass. Now, in 2019, the Conservative Party laid out its ambitions for the future of our country in its election-winning manifesto, which attracted 60% support in the Kettering constituency. Central to our aspirations was positioning Britain as a world leader in rising to the environmental challenges which we are facing, which are facing our planet today. One of the challenges identified was how we manage and process waste, and in particular combating the growing problem of discarded waste, of which drinks containers are a large part. In that manifesto, the Conservative Party outlined plans for a world-class deposit return scheme for drinks containers in a bid to minimise their impact on the environment. The manifesto said, and I quote, We will crack down on the waste and carelessness that destroys our natural environment and kills marine life. We will introduce a deposit return scheme to incentivise people to recycle plastic and glass. I would be honoured and delighted.
First of all, congratulate the Honourable Gentleman for Carrington for bringing this forward. Back home in Northern Ireland, in my constituency and my council area of Ards and North Down, the council have a strategy and a plan of action for recycling. It includes many of the recycling and doesn't try to leave anyone out or any part of it out. What the Honourable Gentleman is saying, that glass needs to be part of that recycling programme and there needs to be a commitment. And my council, each household has a glass return system and a plastic basin to put the glass into. You can also go to your recycling centres, which are probably no further than 3 miles from any one person. So those are examples of what we're doing in Northern Ireland, where there's a clear commitment and a strategy and a plan through the council, but across the Northern Ireland Assembly as well. Would the Honourable Gentleman like to see that as perhaps a strategy that we should be doing more with?
I thank the Honourable Gentleman for his very helpful and interesting intervention. I commend his local council for their recycling efforts. There are similar schemes across the 4 nations, but as I will come on to later in my remarks, the problem with leaving glass out of the deposit return scheme is that it will be a missed opportunity to increase overall glass recycling rates to the best international standards. And at the moment, my understanding is that the government's proposal for the deposit return scheme in England and in Northern Ireland will be different to the deposit return schemes in Scotland and Wales, which will include glass. And one of the difficulties there is that there'll be different deposit return schemes in the different parts of the United Kingdom.
Mr. Davis, I thank again for letting me come back once more. One of the things, again, just to illustrate the point and support the Honourable Gentleman and what he's putting forward, is that the recycling schemes in our council area have in a way reached their peak, and that's a problem. So what I think the Honourable Gentleman is referring to, and what I would fully support as well, and I know the Minister will give her comments on the matter whenever she comes to the floor, is some way of raising awareness with the recycling. And this could very well be the way of doing that, that there will be a reimbursement advantage for those people who recycle their glass or are prepared to do so. So whatever the Honourable Gentleman is saying, and I'll take a copy of this Hansard and I'll make sure that I refer that to the relevant Minister at the Northern Ireland Assembly to do the very same, as anticipation of what the Minister will say in return.
So, Mr Deputy Speaker, as is usual across so many issues, the Honourable Gentleman and I are on the same page on this issue. And my contention is that the United Kingdom will not be able to achieve international glass recycling levels of the very best unless glass is included in the deposit return scheme. As Conservatives, we made a vow to voters to introduce a scheme which would serve the public and Britain's precious natural habitats. However, Her Majesty's Government has so far committed to introducing a deposit return scheme only inclusive of plastic bottles and aluminium cans across England and Northern Ireland by 2024. Glass is a glaring omission. Now, a huge 86% of respondents to the government's first consultation on deposit return schemes said they wanted glass to be included. But in spite of this overwhelming majority support from technical experts, charities, scientists, and the great British public, calls for glass to be included in the scheme have been ignored. The scheme's current design falls well short of what was promised and will see it fail to achieve what is required. A deposit return scheme excluding glass runs the risk of being a global embarrassment for a country which seeks to position itself as leading from the front on environmental issues. In its current form, the scheme's design will fail to crack down on glass waste and will miss a wonderful opportunity to protect our natural environments from glass pollution. The case has been made that including glass is problematic. However, this case has been made by glass industry lobbyists who have a vested interest in ensuring that glass containers are not included in such a scheme. One such argument is that glass, once collected, can be hazardous and dangerous for those charged with sorting it for recycling when it becomes broken. But this works both ways, as it can also be argued that it poses a greater risk to the public and pet owners when it breaks down in nature rather than in the controlled environment of recycling plants. A lack of a deposit return scheme for glass containers poses a very real risk that they will continue to end up on our pavements and in our parks and outdoor spaces, where they will be a health and safety risk for UK residents. This is a public safety danger which is unmatched by other containers. In this regard, the scheme's current proposal is failing to protect both the environment and the British public. Additionally, glass industry lobbyists have suggested that the inclusion of glass will drive consumers towards purchasing highly polluting plastic bottles. However, with the public already widely aware of the prevalence and environmental impact of plastic pollution, these claims, I would contend, are speculative at best. If we are to tackle the waste crisis, we must trust consumers to do the right thing, but it's vitally important that we arm them with the tools to do so. British Glass responded to the government's consultation, which closed on the 4th of June 2021, citing various concerns which I would contend have little foundation. One of which is that its inclusion would have a detrimental impact on closed-loop glass recycling, despite the industry's present inability to increase glass recycling rates. Indeed, British Glass explained in its response how the industry is committed to a 90% collected for recycling rate and a commitment to an 80% remelt target by 2030, which would see 80% of all glass recycled back into new bottles and jars. But the stark reality is that this goal will almost certainly never be realised. By global standards, the UK lacks well behind its international counterparts in the collection and recycling of glass bottles, sitting behind countries such as Ireland, France, Spain, Italy, Belgium, and Bulgaria. In 2020, the UK's glass collection rate for recycling stood at just 76%, well below Italy, which boasts a recycling rate for glass bottles of 87%. Meanwhile, across the UK, it is estimated that 5 billion glass bottles are consumed per year. And under current recycling rates, this means some 1.2 billion glass bottles are destined to litter our environment or languish in landfill each and every year. Current systems to raise our collection and recycling rates are lacking. Much of the glass collected across the UK is not suitable for closed-loop recycling, where discarded bottles are turned back into new ones. This is due to the current collection process, which often sees the mixing of different colours and crushing during transportation. However, a well-thought-out, properly prepared deposit return scheme can address these issues with separated collection methods, which will make closed-loop recycling far more viable. And this should be considered as a point of urgency, as it's estimated that a well-designed scheme for the UK could improve recycling rates for bottles and cans to over 90%. And at the same time as the government is also presently consulting on the consistency of curbside collections in England, with the laudable aim of reducing confusion, through its plans for the deposit return scheme, it is paving the way for potentially 4 different deposit schemes to be in place in the UK. Potential confusion among consumers caused by the current design is likely to undermine the effectiveness of England and Northern Ireland's scheme. Both Scotland and Wales are set to see glass included in their own schemes, and a lack of consistency across the UK as a whole, where consumers obviously cross borders routinely, could see us fail to raise glass recycling rates to the levels they need to be, due to consumers not knowing when and where glass containers can be disposed of. The deposit return scheme for drinks containers should be designed with a view to avoiding this confusion and instead empower the public to do the right thing. British consumers are overwhelmingly in favour of a scheme which includes all beverage materials and are opposed to the exclusion of glass bottles. A populace poll commissioned in 2020 by environmental organisation Nature 2030 found some 84% of Britons want all beverage containers to be included in the government's proposed scheme. This polling was welcomed by campaigners and academics who outlined how a comprehensive deposit return scheme will give us the best chance to combat litter. What is vitally important, and something which the government mustn't ignore, is that the UK is not walking into unproven territory as it looks to deliver its own scheme. A host of countries have already implemented successful and highly efficient deposit return schemes inclusive of all materials. These have been proven to dramatically increase collection and recycling rates and can be used as a powerful template for Britain to follow in implementing its own scheme. Crucially, due to their success, these other international schemes prove that the issues raised by the glass industry lobbyists here are unfounded. Indeed, all inclusive schemes are common across the world. From over 40 such schemes globally, only 3 do not include glass bottles. And these 3 exclude glass because they already have in place a returnable system specifically for glass bottles, something which the UK obviously currently lacks. Australia implements a deposit return scheme which also covers beverage cartons, while Canada's scheme includes cartons, bags in boxes and plastic pouches. Finland and Denmark, which are considered to implement world-class return schemes, enjoy an incredibly high return rate of 94% and 92% respectively. These successes are widely regarded as being due to their systems being inclusive of all materials, including glass, with the simplicity of the system being crucial to achieving the public support needed for these schemes to be a success. In my view, it makes little sense to deviate from such successful schemes, and even less sense when Scotland and Wales are looking to mirror these international successes. Scotland, for example, is set to introduce a scheme which includes glass bottles by August 2023, while Wales is set to introduce a scheme which includes glass by 2024. It is vital to ensure the interoperability between the schemes and help consumers adopt a consistent and responsible behaviour across the 4 nations of the UK. The government's derisory decision to omit glass is not only seeing us fail to be a world leader on the waste crisis on a global scale, but also fall well behind Scotland and Wales. Some 25 experts in this field have recently urged the government in an open letter to introduce a deposit return scheme for drinks containers which mirrors Denmark's system, with cross-party politicians, non-governmental organisations and academics calling for the government scheme to be inclusive of all materials, including glass, plastic and aluminium. Denmark has a track record of fine-tuning its own scheme to be as effective as possible. This is a ready-made roadmap which the UK could follow. It would help us avoid the potential pitfalls which we may encounter along the way if we follow our own bespoke path. I also wish to raise the issue of VAT. The government presently plans to apply VAT to deposit return scheme deposits on top of the VAT already charged on the drink. The current expectation is that if there were a 20p charge, it will be gross of VAT, i.e. 17 pence plus 3 pence, which means if the customer does not return the drinks container they buy, the producer will only receive 17 pence back instead of the full 20 pence. The remaining 3 pence will be taken in VAT by the government. Factoring in the estimated 28 billion containers on the UK market, this could mean as much as £185 million lost from the scheme through unredeemed deposits, assuming an 80% return rate in the first year alone. This will create a situation where the government effectively ends up profiting from the failure of its own deposit return scheme. What's more, VAT being added to the deposit fee effectively imposes a stealth tax on drinks producers, backing industry into a corner and creating the very real scenario of price rises on these products. If the government is serious about introducing a scheme, it needs to avoid the noise from the glass industry lobbyists and deliver a scheme which works for the environment. Pandering to industry calls make little sense in the face of overwhelming public support for glass to be included. Furthermore, there is a health and safety risk. Glass is a high-carbon, highly polluting material which presents a real hazard to the public once it is discarded in public places. We should be looking to create a scheme which drives the collection and processing of these upwards rather than one which makes closed-loop glass recycling more unattainable. Mr. Deputy Speaker, in conclusion, the omission of glass from the government's deposit return scheme represents a real and serious threat to the effectiveness of which a deposit return scheme in England and Northern Ireland can realistically be delivered. Quite simply, its exclusion would be a potential catastrophe for our natural spaces as we all look to stem the tide of drink container pollution. But it also represents a direct betrayal of a promise made by the Conservative Party to voters at the last general election, when we said in the manifesto that we would introduce a deposit return scheme for both plastic and glass drink containers. I urge Her Majesty's Government to rectify this as a matter of urgency and immediately revisit its scheme's design so as to include drinks containers made from glass.
Thank you very much indeed, Mr. Deputy Speaker. And on the day of the humble address to Her Majesty, if he would indulge me, I would like to add my voice and that of my constituents of Bury St Edmunds to others in this place who have expressed their deep appreciation and thanks for Her Majesty's dedication, kindness, good humour and service to our nation. She's visited our great county on many occasions, and I know we will be celebrating, as the rest of the country is, with bunting and fanfare over the coming week. Indeed, I am looking forward to judging a fancy dress competition in one of my lovely villages. As a long-term advocate for our natural environment, Her Majesty, I'm sure, would be extremely interested in the important subject that we are discussing here today. And on that note, I'd like to thank the Honourable Member for Kettering for securing this debate and for the opportunity to discuss the Government's plans for introducing a deposit return scheme for drinks containers. As I'm sure my honourable friend is aware, there is an awful lot going on in this space, driven by our resources and waste strategy and the powers that we took in the Environment Act passed last November. And with that in mind, we are proud to be driving forward work across the collection and packaging reforms, which is made up of both the deposit return scheme, the extended producer responsibility for packaging, and that increased consistency in recycling collections to which he referred in England. DRS is pivotal to this government's commitment to increasing recycling rates. However, we shouldn't overlook that it will also provide other benefits. In particular, it will deliver that high-quality recyclate for recycling. It will enable the drinks industry to close the loop on their packaging. It will help move the UK towards a circular economy where resources are kept in use longer and waste is minimised, and take us away from that linear throwaway society into something much more circular. It will also deter the littering of in-scope containers and reduce the associated damage to wildlife and habitats, and therefore promote pro-environmental consumer behaviours with that potential knock-on effect to other positive environmental activities. Now, my honourable friend has raised some important concerns on behalf of the industry on the issue, and I want to be very clear that it's our ambition to introduce a deposit return scheme that works for everyone, for the consumer and also right across the industries. I know that in many of our households, and likewise across the UK, drinks packaged in metal cans are drunk regularly. And for this reason, we will all recognise that those cans, light, sturdy, convenient for storage and transport, have intrinsic qualities that will always make them desirable to consumers and the product of choice. We are, of course, mindful that any cost to people's purses or businesses is particularly tough in the current environment, but we do want to introduce policies that encourage recycling and reduce the amount of litter that blights our environment. While DRS is a complex policy to introduce, requiring the efforts of multiple industries, in one way, we are lucky, as he referred to, there are 40 other schemes out there with existing deposit returns in other nations that we can learn from. So not only are we drawing on the experiences of the rollout in Scotland to inform our implementation and planning, but I also had the pleasure of meeting with the Minister for the Environment from Lithuania, where a scheme was also recently introduced. And I have plans very shortly to visit Norway to find out more about the DRS scheme they have there, who, by the way, are one of those who haven't included glass in their scheme. And by way of information, neither have Netherlands nor Sweden. But I do understand, and I note the Honourable Member for Strangford is no longer in his place, that Southern Ireland, in their plans for a scheme, are contemplating excluding glass, I believe. So there is a mixture of schemes out there. I recognise we have a situation where there are different scopes of deposit return schemes across the United Kingdom, given that glass is excluded in England and Northern Ireland. But we remain totally committed to working with the devolved administrations and to ensure that there is a completely coherent, interoperable system across the UK. Now, excluding glass does actually offer us an opportunity, in my view, to look at options, how we incentivise the reusable schemes for glass. And those containers that are not within the deposit return scheme are within the extended producer responsibility scheme. So exclusion doesn't mean in any way that we aren't making policy to improve the reuse, recycling and resource efficiency of these things. To the question of VAT, we are, as he would expect, in discussion with Her Majesty's Treasury, and I've met with the Financial Secretary, as has the Secretary of State, on this matter in the recent past. Ultimately, DEFRA's ambitious collections and packaging reform agenda cannot be delivered by government alone, and the deposit return scheme will be an industry-led scheme. For this reason, we, alongside colleagues in the devolved administrations, are continuing to work closely with all the relevant sectors to implement a scheme that is as coherent and aligned as we can make it. I would like to thank this opportunity to all those who fed into the consultations and those continue to be generous with their insights and expertise into what is positive about schemes they run and where they think we can improve. And that will ensure that we deliver in England a successful deposit return scheme.
Before I pose the question, just want to wish, on behalf of the Speaker and the Deputy Speaker team, everybody working at the Palace of Westminster, a most glorious, historic Platinum Jubilee weekend, 4-day celebration next week. The question is that this House do now adjourn. As many of that have say aye? Aye. Don't you know? I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it. Order, order.